I never imagined that a simple ride home from work could stir something so deep inside me. It was supposed to be nothing more than a kind gesture from my boss, Andrew. Yet what he said during that short drive completely disarmed me, leaving me with tears in my eyes and a heaviness in my chest I can still feel even now. Before I dive into the story, I'd love to know, from which cities are you watching us tonight? Let me know in the comments below, because your voices always bring me closer to you. Now let me take you back to that evening that changed the way I looked at myself and at Andrew. The day had been unusually long. The office air seemed heavier than usual, thick with the kind of silence that follows deadlines met only by sheer determination. By the time the clock hit 7, most people had already gone home. I lingered, sorting through papers, sipping the last of my lukewarm coffee, and thinking of the quiet apartment that waited for me. That's when Andrew appeared at my desk. "Margaret," he said gently, "you shouldn't walk to the bus stop this late. Let me give you a ride home." At first, I hesitated. Andrew wasn't just my boss. He was a man I respected deeply. He carried himself with a calm authority that always seemed to anchor the rest of us, even when projects threatened to spiral out of control. Accepting a ride felt almost too personal, like stepping into a space that blurred the neat line between professional and private. But his tone wasn't demanding. It was warm, almost protective. And truthfully, I was tired, too tired to argue. "All right," I said with a small smile, gathering my bag. "Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it." We walked out together, the sound of our footsteps echoing against the polished floor of the empty corridor. The parking lot was quiet, painted with the golden glow of the streetlights. His car, a sleek silver sedan, looked almost like a promise of safety in the dim light. He opened the passenger door for me, a small courtesy that somehow made my heart catch. As we drove away, the city lights flickered past like scattered stars, each one holding a memory I hadn't yet lived. The hum of the engine filled the silence between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. I was content just listening to the rhythm of the road, the occasional turning of the wheel, the faint sound of his breathing. It felt strangely intimate, being in that small enclosed space with him, cut off from the rest of the world. Then, out of nowhere, Andrew broke the silence. "You know, Margaret," he said softly, his eyes focused on the road ahead, "you remind me of someone I once knew, someone strong, but who always carried more than she ever should have." I turned to look at him, surprised. His voice wasn't casual. It carried weight, as if he'd been holding those words back for a long time. "What do you mean?" I asked, my own voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at me briefly, and in that moment, his eyes revealed something raw, something human that I had never seen in him at the office. "I mean that I see the way you push through, day after day. You keep things together for everyone, and I don't think anyone has ever really stopped to ask if someone's keeping things together for you." The words hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened. For years, I had lived in a rhythm of responsibility. Work, home, family obligations, without ever pausing long enough to consider what it cost me. And here was Andrew, seeing me, not as an employee, not as just another person in his office, but as a woman who carried her own battles silently. I didn't know what to say. My eyes stung as the tears began to form, uninvited but unstoppable. I turned my gaze to the window, watching the streetlights blur into streaks of gold. "I never thought anyone noticed," I finally whispered. He slowed the car slightly, as though giving me more time, more space to breathe. "I notice," he said simply, "and I think you deserve to hear it, that you're not invisible, Margaret. You matter more than you realize." His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, unraveling years of loneliness I hadn't admitted even to myself. All the nights I had spent feeling unseen, all the mornings when I put on a smile no one questioned, it all came rushing back, colliding with this moment. A single tear slid down my cheek, and I brushed it away quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," I murmured. I don't know why I'm crying." "Don't be sorry," Andrew said, his voice low but steady. "Sometimes tears are the most honest answer we have." The sincerity in his tone left no room for pretense. I felt my guard fall, piece by piece, until all that was left was the truth of how deeply his words had touched me. We rode the rest of the way in silence, but it wasn't the silence of distance. It was the kind of silence that speaks volumes, filled with understanding, unspoken respect, and something else I couldn't quite name. When he finally pulled up in front of my building, I almost didn't want to get out. As I reached for the handle, Andrew spoke again. "Margaret, you don't have to carry it all alone. Not anymore." I froze, his words hanging in the air like a promise I didn't know how to answer. My heart was beating too fast, and my thoughts swirled with emotions I hadn't prepared for. "Thank you, Andrew," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "For the ride, and for everything you said tonight. I won't forget it." He gave me a small smile, one that seemed to hold both kindness and something deeper, something waiting to be uncovered. "Good night, Margaret." As I stepped out of the car, the cool night air greeted me, but it couldn't chase away the warmth that lingered inside me. I walked to my door, each step echoing the weight of his words. When I finally closed the door behind me, I leaned against it, my heart still racing. That night, lying in bed, I replayed every detail. The way his voice softened when he spoke, the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet strength in his presence. And as the tears returned, they no longer felt like sadness. They felt like release, like finally being seen for who I was. I had no idea then that this ride home was only the beginning, that Andrew's words would open a door to a part of myself I thought I had long buried. But I did know one thing. Something had shifted inside me, something that could not be undone. The next morning I woke before the alarm, the sky still soft and gray, the kind of color that makes you whisper without knowing why. Andrew's words were still there beside me like a light left on in another room. "You don't have to carry it all alone. Not anymore." I lay still and let the meaning spread through my chest. It felt both unbelievable and exactly right, like a key I'd been keeping in a drawer without ever checking which door it opened. By the time the kettle began to sing, I decided to send a simple message. "Thank you for last night. Your kindness meant more than you know." No need for punctuation gymnastics, no explanation. Just the truth. I set the phone down and watched the steam twist above my cup, wondering how many years I'd spent making tea for strength instead of comfort. The difference is tiny until you feel it. At work, the office hummed with the familiar Monday machinery. Printers clicking, chairs rolling, someone laughing too loudly at something small. I kept my pace steady, answering emails, sorting a supply order, fixing the typo on the quarterlies that no one else had noticed. Around 10, Andrew appeared at the edge of my cubicle, leaning lightly on the divider like he belonged to the air more than the floor. "Got your message," he said. "I'm glad you wrote. If you're free at lunch, I'd like to talk about some workload shifts, if that's all right with you." The courtesy in his voice settled me. He wasn't marching in with a grand solution. He was asking, not assuming. "Lunch is fine," I said. "There's that little place across the street with the good soup." He smiled. "Perfect." When noon came, we crossed the street with the rest of the office crowd, the winter sun bright but not warm. Inside, the cafe smelled of butter and black pepper, and the waitress greeted me by name, which made me feel known in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We took the table by the window. For a while we talked about predictable things. A supplier who shipped the wrong envelopes, the intern who'd impressed everyone by fixing a stubborn spreadsheet. Then Andrew cleared his throat gently, the way a careful person signals an important turn. 2 things, he said, folding his hands. First, the practical part. I want to move the cost reconciliation task to the finance team. It's theirs by rights, and it'll take a chunk off your plate. Second, the human part. I said some personal things last night, and I want to make sure I didn't overstep. If I did, tell me, and I'll make it right. The relief that washed over me was so immediate it made me lightheaded. He was giving me structure and space, the 2 things I hadn't known how to ask for. You didn't overstep, I said. If anything, you stepped exactly where I needed someone to. I'm not used to that. He nodded like he understood before the words finished leaving my mouth. I learned late how much a sentence can weigh, he said. Years ago, when my sister was sick, people either said too much or nothing at all. The few who found the middle saved us both more than once. Something in his face softened, years of stored sunlight falling across an old room. I felt an urge to reach for his hand and then checked myself. I was still learning the shape of this new room between us. He seemed to sense the movement inside me and rested his palm on the table instead, near mine, not touching, an invitation with no pressure attached. We ate in companionable quiet. The soup was tomato basil, and every spoonful tasted like a memory I didn't know I had. Someone else's kitchen, a radio playing softly in the corner, the clink of spoons and the safety of being asked twice if I wanted more. Halfway through, he said, "Would you be open to a walk? There's a park around the block. 15 minutes. If you'd rather not, lunch is enough." "I'd like that," I said. The words surprised me in how easily they stood up. The park was mostly empty. A gardener trimmed rose bushes that were all thorns and promised this time of year. We took the loop along the fence, our steps falling into a rhythm I didn't have to manage. The air had a clean edge that made my lungs feel polished. "May I say something personal?" he asked after a few minutes. He had a way of checking the door before walking into a room. "Yes," I said. "Please." "You remind me of the women who raised me," he said. "My mother, my aunt. They built whole worlds out of short budgets and long days and convinced the rest of us that magic was just effort wearing perfume. They were respected, but I'm not sure they were always seen. Last night, I heard how your days sound when no one else is listening. I wanted you to hear how they sound to me." I stared straight ahead, because eye contact felt too bright. His words moved through me like a quiet wind opening curtains. I thought about the years after my marriage ended, about the promises I kept so faithfully that I forgot to make a few to myself, about the way a woman's competence can camouflage her exhaustion. What did I want to do with this new light? The question felt as big as the winter sky. I stopped beside a bench and took a breath that reached the bottom of me. "Sometimes I'm afraid that if I sit down, everything will fall," I said. "So I don't. I stack the next thing on top of the last thing and call it a day. But last night, when you said I didn't have to carry it alone, it felt like someone handed me a handle I can share." He lowered himself onto the bench slowly, as if respecting the weight of the moment. "Would it help if I checked in once in a while?" he said. "Not as your boss, as a person who thinks you matter. We could make it a rule that either of us can say no. Consent cuts both ways." The word consent, said calm and ordinary, settled over the scene like a promise. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a partnership of attention. "It would help," I said. "But I have a request, too." "Name it." "We keep our lanes clear at work. If anything ever feels blurry, We say so right away. I've spent years learning how to stand up straight. I don't want to let that go, not even for kindness." "Agreed," he said, and the smile that followed didn't shine. It warmed. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at me. "May I ask one more thing, and you can tell me no without explanation." I nodded. Would a hug feel comforting or complicated? The care in the question undid me. For a moment, all the months of doing everything by myself lined up behind my ribs like a crowded hallway. I pictured opening a door and letting them file out into the yard to play. "Comforting," I said, surprised at my own certainty. He stood and let me come to him. We didn't grip. We held. There's a difference. His coat was cool at first, then warm. I could feel his breath more than hear it, a quiet tide. I rested my cheek just for a moment against the spot where a neck meets a shoulder and felt my body remember how to exhale without permission. When we stepped back, nothing in the world had changed and everything had. "Thank you," I said. That was human. "Good," he said. "That's my favorite kind of adjective." We returned to the office lighter in some way that didn't invite commentary. In the afternoon, I drafted the memo transferring the reconciliation task to finance. I wrote it in plain language, as if future me would need clarity, which she undoubtedly would. At 4:30, I refilled my water bottle and realized I hadn't taken my usual ibuprofen. My shoulders felt different. Less like armor, more like a garment I'd chosen. On the bus ride home, yes, I took the bus, not because I had to, but because I wanted the ordinary pleasure of sitting with my thoughts. I made a list in the Notes app on my phone. Not a to-do list. A what-if list. What if I took the pottery class 2 blocks from my building? What if I called my sister on Wednesdays just to trade recipes? What if I kept fresh flowers on the kitchen table, even if they were the $5 ones from the market that give up after 3 days? What if I said yes to help without writing an essay on why I deserved it? By evening, the apartment felt different. I opened the window an inch and let in the night sounds. A dog's collar chiming against its tag, a set of footsteps that guessed at a song. I pulled out the blue bowl with the chip on the rim and filled it with tangerines because they looked like little suns, and because this felt important. Didn't need a better reason. Around 8, my phone lit up with a message from Andrew. Not a paragraph. A single line. Checking in. "How's your evening starting?" I smiled at how ordinary the words were and how carefully they had been arranged. Like the hug, the message didn't solve anything. It made space for things to solve themselves. I told him about the tangerines, about the open window, about the way the street sounded like someone else's poem I could borrow until mine arrived. He replied with a photo of his grandmother's recipe card for chicken soup, edges worn smooth by generations of hands. "If you ever want the real thing, I can make a pot and leave a container at the front desk. No strings." The phrase "no strings" sat politely next to the offer like a chaperone. I didn't say yes right then. I wanted to protect the gentleness of what we were building by not rushing it into utility. Instead, I wrote, "Maybe another time. Tonight I'm practicing being okay with a bowl of fruit and a quiet apartment." He sent a thumbs up and then, after a moment, a sentence that lifted something in me like a curtain catching a page of light. "I'm glad you're choosing yourself." The week unfolded in measured steps. We set a 15-minute check-in for Fridays, which sometimes took 5 minutes and sometimes stretched to 15 with the elasticity of honest talk. We didn't use the time to dissect our feelings like middle schoolers passing notes. We used it to name a single heavy thing and a single good thing. I learned how to say I could use help with that without rushing to soften it. He learned that I preferred clear plans to generous vagueness, and he adjusted like a person who wanted to be good at caring, not praised for trying. One evening near the end of the month, rain began mid-commute, the quick kind that pushes cars into caution. Andrew messaged to say he was driving past my neighborhood on the way to pick up an old record player from a friend. Did I want a ride? I looked at the sky, at the way the water stitched the street to the air, and said yes. When the car door closed, the sound felt like closing a book on a chapter that had taught me something valuable. We didn't fill the drive with important conversation. The windshield wipers kept time for us. At a red light, he said, almost casually, "I'm proud of you, you know. Not for doing more. For doing less where less is wiser." The tears came again, but they were clean tears, unashamed. "I'm proud of me, too," I said, surprised to hear it out loud. "I didn't know you could feel proud of yourself without accomplishing something that earns a certificate." "You earned something better," he said. "You let yourself be held. That's advanced work." When we reached my building, he didn't turn off the engine. The light from the dashboard softened his face into its kindest angles. I reached for the handle and then paused, not because there was more to say, but because I wanted to honor the moment the way you honor a door that has welcomed you. "Andrew," I said, "I don't know where any of this goes. I don't need it to be a story with a capital S. What I know is that I'm going to sleep tonight feeling accompanied, and that changes the shape of the dark." He nodded like a person listening to a vow make itself. "Same here," he said. "And thank you for letting me be careful. I never want to forget to ask." "Then don't," I said with a smile. "And I won't either." I stepped out into the rain, the kind that is gentle enough to be forgiven. He waited until I'd reached the awning before pulling away, and I raised my hand in a small wave that somehow felt like an agreement signed in weather. Inside, I peeled off my coat and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back wasn't younger or fancier. She was simply present. The lines at the corners of my eyes looked less like tally marks and more like a map. I made tea, not for strength this time, but for celebration, and sat by the window to watch the rain revise the street. I thought of the girls we once were and the women we became. How many times we learned to carry more. How rare the moments when someone stepped in to say, "Let me take an edge." I thought of Andrew's careful questions, of the way